Survival horror is a subgenre of action-adventure games that focuses less on actual action and more on scaring the player with atmosphere. What separates survival horror from typical action is the player is often in some way handicapped, through lack of ammo, roadblock mechanics, or controls. Survival horror titles often pull from established horror themes, films, and classic stories. So much of survival horror comes from traversing dark mazes, solving puzzles, and the sense of danger lurking around every corner. Before survival horror became the established genre it is today, horror-themed games were few and far between. Titles like Infogrames' 1992 Alone in the Dark, Capcom's 1989 Sweet Home, and Human Entertainment's 1995 breakout hit Clock Tower were making players feel uneasy sitting in front of their crackling old CRTs. Of these developers, one in particular took a chance to make history: Capcom, who ironically would one day become very much like the Umbrella Corporation themselves, gave the go-ahead to rising superstar Shinji Mikami and the well-established game designer Tokuro Fujiwara to create something that would define survival horror and change the way we played video games: 1996's Resident Evil for the PlayStation 1. Resident Evil tells the tale of Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, members of Raccoon City Police Department's Elite Stars unit, as they investigate the ominous and seemingly abandoned Spencer Mansion, following the disappearance of their comrades. After being viciously attacked by monstrous creatures, the team thinks they can find refuge in the mansion, but little did they know, their nightmare was just beginning. With a setup like that, players began to feel like they were taking part in a horror movie, not just playing a game. It was a truly unique experience, something that was special, something that gave the player that feeling of excitement and dread at the same time. But where exactly did this feeling come from? What exactly did survival horror mean? Resident Evil used pre-rendered backgrounds to establish its unique ambiance, along with fixed camera angles, which meant that not only would the backgrounds be higher quality than the gamers were used to, they also had to be experienced the way that the developers intended. On top of this game had a revolutionary, at the time, control scheme called tank controls, which hindered movement just enough to make getting past enemies inconvenient. Throughout the game, players had to manage their resources carefully. It was no longer about clearing the screen of enemies. It was about choosing which enemies you had to clear. One mistake and you wouldn't be able to survive. Your choices mattered. You had to manage your inventory carefully in order not to have to backtrack through a nightmare of enemies to complete an objective. You felt stressed. You felt like you needed a break, but you weren't getting one. This new way to play horror proved to be a winning strategy, as Resident Evil received critical acclaim, went on to sell over 2.75 million units in its lifetime, and at the time was the best-selling PlayStation game. With this success, the game got numerous re-releases and ports over the years, but fans wanted more. I wanted more. Fans wanted their favorite game to come into the modern era, and in 2002, they got their wish. Resident Evil for the GameCube, affectionately just called Remake by fans, was everything the original was and more. It was supercharged, a true example of what a remake was supposed to be. Not only was it a graphical update, but it introduced new gameplay elements, new story details, and tweaks to the original that would keep old and new players on their toes. Remake was and still is one of the greatest remakes of all time, surpassed only by another in the series, 2019's Resident Evil 2. Shinji Mikami again brought us his vision of what it means to be afraid. But why is all this important? Because without Resident Evil, we wouldn't have countless games we all know and love. Without Resident Evil, many of us wouldn't have a love for video games like we do. And without Resident Evil, I wouldn't be the person I am today. This game changed the way I viewed video games. Without it, I wouldn't have fell in love with games like Parasite Eve, Silent Hill, System Shock 2, and so many others. It's the first game I ever played by myself, and as you can tell, it marked me for life. And you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. So I hope you stick around with me in the coming weeks, because I'm going to be taking a look at some of the most important survival horror games that were ever made. Everyone knows about Resident Evil, but there might be a few here that you don't know about. So as always, I'm TG. If you like what you saw, you know what to do. If not, keep it sleazy, keep it spooky.